one of the guys flicked a lit cigarette into the crowd at somebody. And one of the guys was like jumping while playing guitar, pointing the machine head on his guitar, the thing at the end of the neck with the tuning pegs, at people, like basically spearing them. Welcome to Feedback Def. I'm Sabby RK, the apostate music journalist. Thanks for joining me. I recently came across a New Yorker podcast named Critics at Large, which is hosted by Alexandra Schwartz, Numi Fry, and Vincent Cunningham. And I have to say, I really enjoy this podcast, even though I've never been a fan of the New Yorker, to say the least. I've always, even since I was in high school, found the New Yorker to be like a transmission tower broadcasting exactly why a certain class of people are just completely immersed in their own delusion. Now, you could say that the same is true for all classes of people and all of us. I'm sure that is true to a certain extent. Me talking to someone who is from a completely different perspective, they're going to hear, man, this person has so many blind spots, they don't even know what's what. But this episode that I heard on Nathan Fielder, who hosts a show, hosts two shows, Nathan For You and The Rehearsal on HBO, where they were talking about cringecore and what they termed cringecore, and how certain things we watch are meant to induce a sense of cringe because they violate the social contract. Because this guy Nathan Fielder does a lot of things that are overstepping bounds, and the discomfort you get while watching is sort of the point of watching. Point of order: Nathan For You ran on Comedy Central for 4 years and is no longer airing. The Rehearsal is on HBO and is currently airing. I should also point out, Nathan For You was a parody of a reality show, with Fielder and his team scripting situations and scripting this character who he plays that is based on his actual self. However, the participants on the show were never aware of that, and so they believed all of his proposals were genuine. So I want to point that out because I can anticipate people saying, oh, this guy doesn't understand what comedy is and he doesn't get satire. No, but they were still the butt of the joke in these really outrageous situations where you're watching and you're like, oh my God, how could this person be convinced to do this by this guy? There's a trailer for season 3, which I'll link, where the host of the narrator of the trailer, kind of playfully, but refers to Fielder as a master manipulator. I think that's really telling. Tells us a lot. And watching these hosts kind of wrestle with these, with their own discomfort, to me epitomizes what I've always felt about the New York Times. I meant the New Yorker, but I feel the exact same way about the New York Times as well, so I'm happy to throw them in there. Now, I will say, again, I really, really enjoy their podcast, and I'm not just saying that. Like, I am going to go back for repeated listens. I discovered their podcast because I was searching for commentary on Taylor Swift, which is not fucking hard to find, right? You can just stick your head out the window and boop, something's going to hit you. But I found this after I found the New York Times' Popcast. And surprise, surprise, I really enjoyed the Taylor Swift episode, even though I have a lot to say about that and about Taylor Swift in general. And the commentary around Taylor Swift and how I think it's manufactured and invested with all this sort of artificial meaning that doesn't really belong there. Anyway, then I checked out some other episodes, and this is actually the cringecore episode on Nathan Fielder is the first episode. And one of the hosts, I can't remember if it was Numi or Alexandra, said that she initially just couldn't watch the shit. Like, it just was just like, I don't want to watch this. And then she like binge watched all the episodes of one of Nathan Fielder's shows in one night. And they were like, what? You did that? So, okay. I think this is instructive in a few different ways. Because, again, I don't want to take shots at these hosts. And look, if you are in a position where you are a correspondent for the New Yorker and you basically get to do this, but make real money doing it, my hat's off to you, regardless of what you're saying or what I think about it. But one of the hosts mentioned Andy Kaufman and how Andy Kaufman, according to her, once did a stand-up routine with the intention of, so they played an audio clip. This is what happened. They played an audio clip of Andy Kaufman reading The Great Gatsby in a British accent, steadily angering the crowd more and more and more, who are at a comedy club expecting to be, to watch a comedy routine. And here he is doing this performance art piece with the express intention of angering them to the point where they beat him up. And it is undeniable how much talent Andy Kaufman had. But this, to me, pinpoints so much about how we're completely lost, right, in this vacuous abyss of meaninglessness. It doesn't impress me at all, and it shouldn't impress anyone, that someone would want to do this. There's no point to it. It's complete nihilism. It's a complete indicator that there's nothing left for you to actually... there's no way for you to express a sense of meaning, and so all you can do is make these like meek burp-like gestures, self-destructive gestures, to try to sort of send up or make fun of the overall, and do it in a snide, ironic way, which I think sucks, which I think is a fucking charade. I think the moment you can be in a crowd and go, oh, that's cool, that's performance art, that to me is like, you have to feel to some degree trapped by the artifice of what's around us for you to watch somebody resist it in that way and think that that has any value whatsoever. I don't give a fuck what Andy Kaufman accomplished in his actual art, when he was actually making art, but that to me means nothing. And so to not have the moral clarity to be like, this is fucking nonsense, whatever, I'm gonna go pay attention to something else. I mean, just to be blunt, there's many neighborhoods in this country and in the world. You don't have to fucking make an effort to get beaten up. You will, like, it will readily come to you, right? And so knowing that, you have to have a remove from violence and be in this sort of bubble to think it's alluring to go closer to it, and then pass that off under the pretense that this is somehow artful or making some kind of statement. It says nothing at all. It's cheap. Likewise, I haven't watched Nathan For You or The Rehearsal, but they played clips on this episode of Critics at Large, and it's like, first of all, the guy is just fucking straight lying to people, setting them up for something really, really uncomfortable. It's actually really sad to listen to. Now, again, I'll grant you, if you watch the show, I mean, I'm a big fan of HBO's programming in general, so I imagine there's some other undercurrent or point, and yes, he puts himself in a lot of situations where he's totally the object of ridicule and mockery, Fielder himself. But it immediately struck me that you have to have a certain detachment, a certain lack of conscience to even be speaking to someone in that way without breaking down, either just busting out laughing or just being like, I can't go through with this, right? We saw that with Borat as well. It's like the nerve it takes to put yourself in these situations and not register around you, like the lack of empathy or the ability to step over your empathy, if that's the case, because I don't know how much empathy Fielder and Sacha Baron Cohen feel. To be able to do that is just kind of gross. And why does a culture think, oh my God, I'm going to go watch that? Well, it's because most of us feel we are not able to do that. But why would you want to aspire to do that? Why wouldn't you look at it as, well, my small acts, my individual, in my little realm of preserving social cohesion is actually the more laudable thing to do. Watching us do that with each other is where we want to be. So there's a sense of freedom, I guess, for people vicariously seeing someone do and say things that they themselves feel they are not allowed to do, or they don't have the leeway to do without consequences. And yet, out of the other side of our mouth, as a culture, we're like, narcissist here, narcissism, this narcissism, this person narcissist, this person narcissist. It's like, well, are you hearing yourself? Maybe collectively, we want to see more narcissism. We want to be able to take more and say, no, I want to say this, consequences be damned. But having people do it in this way is just kind of fucked up. And so to have one of these hosts not stick by her convictions and go, I didn't want to watch this felt shitty to watch. Fuck it, I'm not watching this. To have her then push through that and binge the whole thing, it's like, okay, we don't even have the moral clarity to say, I don't want this. I don't support this. This feels empty. This feels destructive. It feels cruel to be putting. So what Nathan Fielder does, is they explain in the podcast, he pretends to, like, he approaches people who have small businesses that are failing and pretends to like suggest things to help them. Now, you got to wonder why they believe his cockamamie proposals anyway. And then the camera follows him trying to help them with these ridiculous proposals that are clearly going to end in disaster. And it's like really just a shitty thing to do to people. Now, I imagine they're getting paid. I'm sure they were motivated by being on camera thinking, well, I'm going to play him. I'm going to play along because even though it looks like I'm being played, I'm going to play I'm going to play him and I'm going to play this show, because it'll get me some attention. Nevertheless, watching people do this to themselves, especially with their business on the line, like, not with it. And watching him navigate these interactions is in this like cold way where he's just kind of smirking and making fun of them and the joke is on them. That doesn't feel good to me. I wouldn't watch that. Then he has another show called The Rehearsal where people come to him to rehearse this big moment that they want to like enact in real life. Like one of the subjects of one of the episodes, he lied when he first started going to trivia night. He lied to all the people on his trivia team that he had like this master's degree or something, and he has to confess it to them. I mean, I can't think of anything less important to watch than this, but like, he had to confess it. So Fielder has the budget to recreate the entire fucking bar where he's going to go confess to his trivia teammates who have been friends of his for years now, right? And it's like the longer you keep up with this lie, the harder it is. And they rehearse, Fielder helps him rehearse this confession. I mean, that's kind of interesting, but it also has this kind of like Jackass kind of vibe to it, right? Like Borat, Jackass. Like, there are things about Borat I admire, the things about Sacha Baron Cohen and Ali G and everything. I thought it was useful for him to be putting himself in certain situations, speaking to people, pretending to be this other role, and then watching the reaction, right? But then after a while, it's just like, well, maybe this guy maybe there's not as much there as we're giving him credit, and this guy just gets off on setting off all these negative vibes around him in a way that most of us wouldn't do. Maybe there's a lack of conscience there. And similarly, Jackass, I mean, I like the Steve-O podcast, but it's like, I thought that was fucking lame and self-destructive too. It's like, what are we doing here, right? I was at a show, and I hope I'm getting the band right. I'm pretty sure it was the Dwarves. This would have been the mid-2000s, and they played here in the city I live in at a venue, a legendary venue named the Bug Jar. And I remember a couple friends of mine, people I really care about, talking after the show about how, man, one of the guys flicked a lit cigarette into the crowd at somebody, and one of the guys was like jumping while playing guitar, pointing the machine head on his guitar, the thing at the end of the neck with the tuning pegs, at people, like basically spearing them, trying to. And my friends were talking about this breathlessly as if this was like so impressive, and I was like, man, that fucking sucks. Like, fuck that shit. Or like G.G. Allen. Like, whoa, wow. Now, I'm not putting Andy Kaufman on the same plane as G.G. Allen, but they are both useful to look at. Why is it that we feel, or not me, but why is it that we collectively, or this culture, has this sense of titillation with things like this? I would also say that people from the polite classes, the intellectual sort of let's observe culture, as we, even though that's what I'm doing, don't have the moral clarity to guide us through anything. This is not strictly a class issue, and I think it's important to point this out, because in other parts of the world, what's considered lowbrow and highbrow here, it doesn't always arrange itself that way. So you do have, in certain other parts of the world, working classes having more exposure to literature that we would consider sort of highbrow and highfalutin. It doesn't always break down that way. And in fact, it changes over time. Like Shakespeare was trash soap opera entertainment of its day. It was for everybody. And then it slowly elevated, migrated here to the States. And even there's an awesome book, by the way, named Highbrow, Lowbrow, which I'll link in the show notes, where you find out that when Shakespeare migrated to the States, even people who couldn't read here in the US in like the early days of the country could recite Shakespeare, which is mind-boggling to think about, especially when I recall how my dad I would feel like I was being tortured, being at 8 years old, being forced to memorize passages from Shakespeare, and it turned me off to Shakespeare for a long time. Sorry, Dad. I've since found my way back to it, but it just goes to show the difference that, this was considered pop culture. This was people talking about, like, I don't know, Seinfeld or some HBO TV series or some pop music, they'd be talking about Shakespeare in the same way at a certain point in time. And so that's important to remember, that some of the things that you hear coming from outlets like the New Yorker and the New York Times and all these this constant churn of think pieces might strike us as like, oh, that's very intellectual, that's very sort of snooty, but it's not necessarily so. So I don't think this is just a class issue, what I'm describing, but there is a myopia, like a tunnel vision of outlook that I think is very much fostered and bred into people. And I'm not sure why it is, but when the higher up you get, like the more sort of I don't know, the higher up you get on the class ladder, the more it seems like it's instilled in you to be helpless, right? To lack the nerve to enforce boundaries, which is really, really odd, right? You would think that wealth buys you at least the ability to walk around just Being like, nah, like you're there and I'm here and fuck you, basically, right? Like that wouldn't be any more pleasant, but it would at least show some resolve. Why is lack of resolve? Why is lack of boundary? Why is lack of spine? Why is not speaking from your throat and being definitive? Why is all of that perpetuated? Why are we doing that? And that has spread actually from a certain socioeconomic, intellectually sort of enshrouded sector. It's bled downwards to everyone. And we are now expected to repeat these compulsory phrases where our own agency is removed. First of all, Nathan Fielder walking into anyone's business, 9 out of 10 people, I believe, would realize this fucking guy is lying or he's putting me on. This is too, there's something fishy here right off the bat. So how is it that we are even depicting people on a show who are falling for this when most people would be like, get the fuck out of here. I don't want to do this. Fuck you. Get away. Right? Like they would, eventually you'd start to get turned off. If you have a sense, like a minimum sense of self-protection, you would start to feel an aversion and like back off from me. Get away from my space and my business. I am protecting me and what's mine, and I will not let you come in and desecrate that and make fun of it, ridicule it for entertainment, for the entertainment of others. I would think that's an offensive proposition. But here we are with 3 New Yorker contributors like, well, let's talk about violating the social contract and why is this appealing? It's like, well, it's appealing because we no longer encourage each other to have the backbone to just be definitive. And we're in a lot of fucking trouble because of it. And so we dance around these ways that we actually enable people in hurting us, because if you're from a certain class background, it is not instilled in you to be able to fend this kind of thing off. But I think this goes further back than even any of this. I think this goes back hundreds of years to when science amputated, like the science as we know it, like when the edifice of science as we in the 21st century understand it, in the modern Western sense, when that built itself and that declared its existence by amputating any recognition of the transcendent, of what we would call today the quote-unquote spiritual. And I would highly recommend listening to Rupert Sheldrake's podcasts or his YouTube clips. Rupert Sheldrake is an Oxford-educated scientist. Correction, it's Cambridge, not Oxford. Dyed in the wool, came from that whole tradition until he started studying cats and dogs, and the phenomenon that many people who have animals can tell you about, that cats and dogs have a sense of when their owners are about to arrive from home. He was like, all right, well, let's test it. Let's apply the scientific method. And the backlash to this, not only the backlash, the name calling, saying that he was a quack, and not only that, but the refusal of other people in his field to even look at the data set him off on a path which is pretty awesome to listen to, right? This idea, so he's a proponent of this idea that consciousness is something, is part of nature, which is not actually a very radical proposition, except if you are stuck within the paradigm that we've been inculcated in for hundreds of years now, that the universe is lifeless and life is a random accident and we are just this pile of cells that happen to come together and animate. Even though that paradigm cannot answer what life is, we have no way of expressing or measuring, well, what is the difference between living tissue and non-living tissue, right? They can't answer that. But yet, no, there's nothing. We know that there's nothing. No, 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 no. We can definitively say it, because otherwise we're not being scientific. Well, actually, Rupert Sheldrake has something to say about that, as do several other scientists who don't dichotomize between what we can see and measure with our senses and the possible existence of things outside of those senses. And so the meaninglessness, the seeds of meaninglessness that were planted when that became the dominant, like our dominant cosmological way of looking at the universe, of seeing nature, when it became just de facto understood and assumed that there is nothing, and you have a society that's just rolling along, gears turning, as if not only society is a machine, but nature is a machine, a lifeless mechanism. And I laugh at this prospect because it is laughable. You know, I mean, I don't know, right? As Michelle DeGiocello told me a couple times when I interviewed her, the bass player, musician, recent album out on Blue Note. I interviewed her for Paste Magazine. Awesome, awesome interview. She said it twice. She said it to me once several years ago, and then she said it again. She said, "I will say this with my dick in your face," is what she said. Nobody knows. Okay, so I'm not saying I know. I'm saying, I'm saying I'm convinced enough. I can't convince you, especially if you're in that view where there's nothing. But what I can say is, if you think about the way that idea was first introduced, if you think about the premise, the founding logistical steps that you would want to build on that idea to get to arrive at the conviction that we must presume there's nothing outside of what we have already measured with the tools we have. If you think about that, you might see that there are contradictions and flaws. Rupert Sheldrake is a great place to start. So you have a society that is the product of hundreds of years of that assumption, and yet we have these cultural norms and these what are they called? Oh my God. I can't believe it. Cultural mores. Of course, people are going to think, well, what's the point in, why are we being dupes? Why can't we just rail against it? Because why does it matter? So you get from there's nothing to generation after generation of people feeling this gnawing emptiness, and yet leaning towards social cohesion anyway. And then you have people sort of, getting high off their own fumes, coming up with all these philosophical angles on, well, why are we moral? Why do we, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, well, you could get right to the fucking root of it if you wake up every day and you feel like there is meaning, you feel like your life has meaning. And if you feel in tune with something beyond the self, that's like, there's no need to riddle yourself in both senses of the word on why there's a point in playing into the harmony with your fellow humans and other life forms on the planet, playing into harmony with nature, or trying to. But so from this nihilism, this emptiness, you get, I'm gonna go to a comedy club and get myself beaten up. Because why? Well, because not impressive. And so hearing people try to, well, why do we like watching Nathan Fielder? Why do we like watching Nathan Fielder? Because you don't have enough nerve. Because you weren't raised with enough nerve to say no. That's basically it. And because if you feel trapped by social customs, you will think that you will sort of instinctually envy people who can break those customs with impunity. You will think that they have something you don't. I don't feel that way because I don't lack for meaning in my life. And I don't think that's something unique to me. I think like this is something we all are that's an endowment we can all have access to. It's like a gigantic, priceless bank account we all have access to. It's like all of a sudden you realize, oh, by the way, here's a safety deposit box key that has been sitting in your sock drawer or at the bottom of your laundry hamper for your whole life. It's there, by the way, it's priceless. Having a sense of meaning, having a sense that there is something worth building towards or building in honor of makes shit like Nathan Fielder and Andy Kaufman, I'm going to get my ass beat just because, totally null and void and exposed for the immature, nihilistic charade that they are. So that's just my 2 cents. Although I must say I'm going to keep listening to this podcast because I like it and I think that's cool. I'm actually grateful that even though this podcast represents a certain outlook that I'm really, really, really averse to, I think I like the fact that these people, the hosts, Alexandra, Numi, and Vincent, still grab my attention, and I'm still really impressed by what they do, and I just enjoy the sense of spending time with them, which is what a great podcast is. There's that awesome meme of the kid sitting in front of an ice cream cooler, and he's licking his ice cream, and there's a sticker on the cooler with other kids eating ice cream, and it says what it's like listening to podcasts, and he's just like, yeah. It's like the illusion of feeling like you're hanging with these other kids, but you're by yourself. I really like that about this podcast, and I think that's really important whenever you get that sense of, here's something coming from a media platform I wouldn't normally think I'm digging, but I actually dig the people, and, regardless of what they're saying and what I might, have issue with or what might rub me the wrong way, because, that's what we're doing all the time anyway. There's friends that you love, people you love. It might even be your spouse, life partner, your kid, your one of your parents, one of your best friends. If they were hosting a podcast and you didn't know them, you'd be fucking disgusted by some shit they said too. This is everybody. We have that. So if you want to talk about Nathan Fielder violating the social contract, we got to remember we are always upholding the social contract in ways we might not even know. So if you find yourself hearing something that you might initially resist, but you like the vibe of the people and spending time with these people, just go with it. That's the beauty of it. And I know I've said things that are critical. I don't want to come off like I'm slagging those individual hosts. I really like what they do. But I'm saying some of these concerns that they, to sit there and sort of stroke your chin and go, why do we care about Nathan Fielder? I feel like it would be more useful to be like, why does Nathan Fielder suck? Why is this even... We don't need to be that to handle this with kid gloves so much. You can call a con job out for what it is. And when you feel like your attention is being drawn from you in a way that's like you're being pickpocketed, fuck it. Fuck that. There's no need to give it even that much more attention. So those are my thoughts, my 2 cents. Thanks for hanging with me. I hope you will hit the like and subscribe button. And if you'd like to go further in supporting what I do, this wonderful big budget production, which will probably stay somewhat lo-fi anyway, you can make a donation via Venmo, or you can buy me a coffee. It's at FeedbackDef on both those platforms, linked in the show notes. And you can also subscribe to my Substack, feedbackdeaf.substack.com. You can do that for free, or there are a couple of paid tiers, also linked in the description below. For Feedback Deaf, I am Sabby Reyes Kulkarni, the apostate music journalist. Hopefully not doing a circular flight pattern, staring at my own navel, as the same way as the people who I point out are doing the same thing. Over and out. This is, what's really gross is my hair sticking out like that.